Oil and gas makes modern life possible. The energy the world requires today and tomorrow will come from decisions made in the oil field today. Oil and gas will remain the leading source of fuel to power affordable energy that is sustainable for the billions of people that depend on the success of the industry. The oil field is a group of people, companies, technologies, and institutions working towards providing the world with safe, clean, storable, and transportable power. The Oilfield 360 podcast is a 360-degree deep dive into the leaders of the industry, who will provide listeners with a first-hand account of what it takes to build, maintain, and lead the energy business into the future. The Oilfield 360 podcast is brought to you by the following sponsors: Locked-In Global Energy and Marine, uncommonly independent. Locked-In is the world's largest privately owned insurance broker and risk finance advisor. Locked-In's global energy expertise is centered in Houston and represents the largest concentration of energy specialists, clients, and experiential knowledge in the upstream, midstream, and downstream segments of the oil and gas industry. Visit LockedIn.com for more information. Upright Digital. Upright Digital specializes in partnering with your business to maximize marketing efficiencies. We have a deep understanding of people, their needs, motivations, behaviors, as well as the technologies that enable brands in many industries to utilize what is available in a changing digital landscape. Find us online at uprightdigital.com.
Buongiorno. Welcome to the Oilfield 360 podcast. I'm your host, David Roode, joined by my lovely co-host, Victoria Beard. How are you, Victoria?
I couldn't be better. I mean, we're in Italy.
I know. Can you believe that?
No, I actually cannot.
I mean, look how great the studio is.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, it was very humbling for Baker Hughes to invite us to bring the podcast to their annual meeting.
I know. When you shot me a screenshot of us being as part of the formal agenda, it's like, what happened?
No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. So how have you enjoyed Italy thus far?
Oh, it's been fantastic. As you know, Andrew and I got married back in September, and we didn't have an opportunity for a honeymoon, so we flew in a couple of days early and got to really enjoy the city and the history and the incredible food and the really kind people.
Yeah.
How about you?
Well, in fairness, you and Andrew have been doing lots of little mini honeymoons, huh? As you should. I got it
How you
yesterday.
keep the marriage healthy.
Yeah, got to do. Well, shall we get started? We've got kind of a tight schedule today.
Yeah.
Do you want to introduce our first guest?
Yes, we have with us Tim, the CEO and co-founder of Fervo Energy. So thank you so much for being here.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, glad you're here. So Tim, tell us a little bit about yourself. We like to start these conversations, share a little bit about where you're from and how you got into the energy business.
Yeah, so thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely.
I was actually, so I'm from Texas. I was born in Houston and then ended up moving when I was very young to my hometown, which is Riesel, Texas, which is in central Texas. And then I ended up going to study mechanical engineering at the University of Tulsa.
Yeah.
And graduated at a time when, the shale boom was taking off, probably like the boomiest of boom years for shale. And so I think me and every single other person that I knew got into the oil business when we were graduating from the University of Tulsa in 2012, and that actually brought me back to Houston. So it all kind of came full circle. And so I started working for BHP directly out of college as a drilling engineer right after they'd acquired the PetroHawk assets back in 2012. So that's where I came from.
Very cool. Yeah, I was on the plane with Dick Stoneburner yesterday coming from Houston and the old PetroHawk days. So, well, that's interesting. So tell us about what happened next.
Yeah, so my first job was working in the field, typical early career drilling engineer rotation. So I was working in the Eagle Ford in South Texas. And, among the different oil plays in the onshore U.S., the Eagle Ford is one of the higher temperature ones that you'll find. Not quite as hot as some of the deep Haynesville assets, but still pretty high up there as far as high temperature goes. And so One of the big challenges that we were having was actually, motor and MWD reliability, as we were drilling these higher than expected temperature assets in the Eagle Ford. And so actually my very first job out of college when I was working for BHP was trying to troubleshoot and make some recommendations on, how could we source better equipment, work with our partners to develop new motors, or change our drilling techniques to deal with these high temperatures we were seeing. Sure. And I had never heard of geothermal before, but when you start Googling and looking through all the literature libraries around, what do you do about high temperature drilling, the word geothermal pops up all the time. And so I was pulling all that information in to try to figure out how we could adjust our drilling practices, and that led me to wonder, what is this geothermal thing that I'm reading about? Why is there a whole industry here that also uses drilling that I'd never heard of before? And that led me down this rabbit hole, where ultimately what I found was this paper that had been put out by MIT in 2006 called The Future of Geothermal Energy. And it describes something called enhanced geothermal systems, where I saw this huge parallel between what we were doing in shale and what needed to happen in the geothermal world, where the enhanced geothermal systems in this MIT energy report had described how there's basically hot rock everywhere, but Sure. The way geothermal works, you have to have flow rates to be able to get that hot brine out of the ground to carry that, to get that heat energy to the surface. And the big challenge with geothermal is, not every well produces high flow rates because there's such a huge distribution of permeability. And so this MIT report basically said geothermal could be this ubiquitous, everywhere, 24/7 carbon-free energy resource, but in order to truly scale, there has to be some sort of technology solution to get high flow rates out of low permeability rock. And I'm literally on a drilling rig in South Texas where we're drilling the Eagle Ford, where of course, as you all know, the magic combination of horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing had come together to finally make the Eagle Ford and all the other shale plays around the U.S. economic. And that was the exact technical challenge that they were solving, was, we know there's oil or gas in this reservoir, but it's too low permeability to flow out on its own. So what do we do? And so what I realized is that, if we cracked the code in oil and gas on how we solve this problem of having productive wells and tight reservoirs, and if that is the technical challenge that was keeping geothermal from scaling, that there was a huge opportunity to see, could these technologies work to unlock geothermal resources the same way they did for the tight oil and gas plays in the U.S.
So before we get too much further, for some of our listening audience, they may not understand what we're talking about.
Yeah.
We've got a broad audience, thankfully. But can you talk to us a little bit about downhole conditions and give us a range of temperatures
Sure.
and why it's so tough on equipment?
Yeah. So, geothermal is not new. Geothermal's been around for a long time. Actually, the first geothermal power plant, I'm talking to y'all right now in Florence, Italy, and the first ever geothermal power plant in the world isn't too far from here. Actually, Italy gets credit for sort of inventing the concept of geothermal power. And the basic idea is places that are hot enough where you're in our case, 400, 500, 600 degrees Fahrenheit or hotter, that you can actually use that heat from the subsurface to directly generate electricity. And so in general, the way that geothermal works is you drill wells into these high temperature areas, and then you produce either hot water or steam directly, and then you produce electricity from that. And so, that's the field of geothermal. It's been around for over 100 years. If you're in places like Iceland or New Zealand or here in northern Italy, that works. You've got really high temperature resources that are shallow and already permeable. And so you don't really need a lot more advanced technology. But the struggle with the industry for so many years was, okay, what if you're not sitting right on top of a geyser? Can you still make geothermal work? And that's where this concept of enhanced geothermal systems came about. So it asked the question, can you drill deeper? And if there's not natural fractures in the reservoir, can you create your own? And then it works the same way, though. You pump cold water down, it heats up in that reservoir and comes back to the surface. So in our case, we're going much deeper than traditional geothermal. We're drilling horizontally. We're applying the hydraulic fracturing process to it. We're drilling pairs of wells, so an injection well to pump the cold water down, and then parallel to it, a production well to collect the hot water. And so where we are now, we're drilling wells 10,000 plus feet vertically, and we target reservoirs where we know we can get above 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And as we continue to develop the technology, we've been able to push that max temperature higher and higher and higher as we get better at high temperature drilling.
So why that sweet spot in terms of temperature?
Yeah, so geothermal power plant efficiency is a function of how hot your fluid is. So the higher temperature the fluid, the better power plant electricity conversion that you get. But also the higher temperature you target, two things happen. The earth gets hotter as you go deeper. So if you want to get really high temperature extremes, you've got to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And then it's also, as y'all know, drilling in these high temperature reservoirs is very challenging as well. And so what we are always trying to do is pick that sweet spot where what is the temperature that gives us the best power plant conversion efficiency, but is still drillable. And so it's not a static target. Actually, our first ever project was done in Nevada, Project Red we call it. And given the limitations of directional drilling equipment and electronics at the time, we didn't think we could get much above 350 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's what we did for our very first project, was produce about 350. And it's this sweet spot of, you could drill it without it being exorbitantly expensive, but still get decent power plant efficiency. But what we've seen over time is that the more we do this and the more we work with our partners to develop higher temperature equipment, and the more we develop the right techniques to push hotter, we can go hotter and hotter and hotter. And so Project Cape, which is the big project that we're developing in Utah right now, will ultimately be a 500 megawatt project. And we're almost done with phase one of that, and that's going at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And so already just between our pilot project and Project Cape phase one, we did about a 50 degree Fahrenheit jump. And Cape phase two is going to be about another 50 degree Fahrenheit jump beyond that. So we'll go up to about 450 degrees Fahrenheit. And so, like a lot of new technology revolutions, it's about what are those incremental improvements that stack up to something big. And what we've done is, over the course of drilling about 30 wells as a company from our pilot project to today, we've developed the technology and equipment that allows us to really push that envelope at temperatures. So we're getting close to 450 Fahrenheit today, and every year that goes by, we'll probably get hotter and hotter, because that bang for your buck in terms of that power plant conversion efficiency just gets better and better as you get to higher temperatures. Sure.
So that temperature differential, is it a function of going deeper, or are you just doing something different? Or
it's a function of going deeper.
Yeah.
And then there's also, this is where sort of in our world, a lot of what we do mirrors oil and gas. That's where exploration matters as well, because that thermal gradient is what we call it. That how deep do you have to go to get to that target temperature has pretty wide variation around the world. And our first projects, we're developing them in Utah and Nevada, because that's in this geologic setting that's the Basin and Range, where actually the western United States is actually stretching and pulling itself apart. And as a result, that brings the heat that's down in the subsurface much closer to the surface because of that Basin and Range geology. And so we only have to drill our wells at Project Cape in Utah to about 10 to 12,000 feet. And we're hitting temperatures that are 450 degrees Fahrenheit in that window. If you were just to pick a random spot across the country or in the eastern U.S. or around the world, you might have much lower thermal gradient. And so, since for us cost is a function of how deep you have to drill, that's why we're starting this technology in these areas of Utah and Nevada, where the geology is most prospective for it. But we're going to keep expanding over time as we get to. As we keep driving our cost per foot of drilling down, that opens up a lot more resource for us. So that's kind of the vision for how we go from something that will start in Utah and Nevada and ultimately spread all around the world. It's just a function of how efficient can we get at drilling.
So you saw this opportunity to go into geothermal. Talk to us about what was it like starting the company, what were some of the challenges, and then also where did the name for the company come from?
Sure. So if you go back to those days, I was a first-year drilling engineer at BHP, and basically, I had an idea that I just figured that was so obvious that I would be, I was like, I just learned about geothermal yesterday, and I
should start a company.
Well, I didn't think that at all. I just thought, people who've been looking at geothermal for a while, and it was well known that this challenge of creating permeability in geothermal reservoirs was the main challenge that was keeping it from scaling. And my assumption was that it was so obvious that I could go join a company or find some other way to do it. So I first pitched BHP on it. I was like, hey, look, we've got all these energy transition commitments, and we're great at drilling. That's a core competency of the company. Why don't we do it? And I learned pretty quickly that a first-year engineer can't really steer the strategy of an 80,000 person company. And so I got told to kind of, stay in my place. Although I got the last laugh. Years later, BHP actually became an investor in Fervo.
Oh,
so
fantastic.
it all comes full circle, and they're a great partner today. And then I started cold calling everybody I could in the geothermal industry. And
hi, this is Tim.
Yeah. Why aren't you drilling horizontal wells?
Yeah.
And you know what's funny is the first geothermal folks so I'll tell you, it was interesting. My perspective on this, if you think about when I was first doing these conversations, 2012, 2013, 2014, in oil and gas, shale had just taken off. And so no one was looking at the next thing because they were doing the current thing. And of course, at that time in the boom times, like nobody could keep up. So the idea that you were going to pitch one of these companies like, hey, I know you're struggling to staff and grow and scale up your Eagle Ford or Permian or Bakken operations, but hey, let's do an extra bonus thing on top of that. That was going to fall flat. And the flip side, I looked at this from the geothermal perspective. We're very tactically headquartered in Houston, Texas. I think that's an important thing for our business. When I was starting out, there were no geothermal developers that were in Houston. And my first calls I had with people in the geothermal industry to tell them about this, I realized that disconnect between what the oil and gas industry was doing and what was known in geothermal was massive. There was this wide canyon between the realities that we had. And the first 4 or 5 conversations I had in geothermal, people told me it was impossible to drill horizontal wells. And I just thought it was the most baffling conversation, and I realized that community had not realized how rapidly the technology had shifted in the shale game. And so none of these incumbents, either from the oil and gas side or the geothermal side, were really going after the opportunity. So I thought, okay, I needed to start a company, but I had no idea what that actually entailed. And so luckily for me, I had advice from a mentor who said, you should go get an MBA, because that's kind of what, you could learn. You're already an engineer, you could figure out what to do next. And so I ended up heading to Stanford for school. And I picked Stanford because it's got a great geothermal reservoir program, but also a great entrepreneurship program in the MBA side. And so I left my job at BHP in 2015, and I went to Stanford, on a mission. I was very singularly focused. I got made fun of actually in class because everybody would say, well, what are you going to do when you graduate? And people would give these vague answers of like, oh, maybe I'll do something in finance, or, I'm really passionate about crypto or something, but I don't know. And people would ask me what I wanted to do, and I would say, I'm going to start a company that's going to repurpose oil and gas shale technology to unlock a geothermal revolution. And that was the plan from day one. And so that's what ended up with me at Stanford, and I think we'll probably talk a little bit about that. But the quick answer to your other question on where the name Fervo comes from, it's a sort of a Latin root word that a lot of English words come from, and a lot of words in other languages. It's the same root word that you get fever, effervescent from in English, and it literally means boiling. So that's the origin of the name. Was a great way to talk about making steam and boiling, which is what the company's all about.
So you start the company. You were, I believe, wildly successful raising money from institutional investors and then grants. Talk to us about what that process was like, and also maybe some lessons learned.
Yeah, so we I ended up starting the company before I graduated, actually. So I was still 2017, I was still in school at Stanford.
So how old were you then?
27.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because you were
27.
also a Forbes 30 under 30
That's right.
recipient too.
Yeah, he's also a times 100. He's got a couple awards
He's got
underneath
a
his
few
belt.
little things,
He's
yeah.
making me feel bad about myself.
Yeah. What did you do?
I co-host a podcast.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So I did. I started the company before I was 30, which got me on that list, which was a funny experience. But so it was my second year at Stanford. We started the company because by that point I'd realized that no one was doing this. I shouldn't go join another company trying to do this, because then I'd just be fighting all the usual innovation battles, and so decided to start our own. And there were a few things that really mattered there, kind of in those early days. One thing that was pretty transformative for me, especially coming to school originally, not having no idea how venture capital worked or financing or fundraising, was ended up taking a class that was just started actually my second year there, called Stanford Climate Ventures. That was taught by Joel Moxley and Dave Danielson, who were two folks that were sort of serial entrepreneurs, venture capital folks, but with a very specific focus on hard tech ventures, and sort of this recognition that, you know, building a company that relies on frontier science and drilling wells looks a little bit different than a company that is building, you know, the next app. And so that you needed to sort of adjust entrepreneurship to focus on the real hardware challenges. And so those folks were transformative in sort of our early days. And then actually what was nice is they not only taught the class, but they both had day jobs as VC investors. So Fervo's first venture capital actually came out of that class, where I took that class for a quarter, and luckily Dave pulled me aside afterward and said, was this a class project for you? Because the way this class was structured, you came in with an idea, and over the course of 10 weeks, they kind of walked you through go-to-market, financing structure, techno-economic analysis, you know, hiring, incorporating all the stuff you need to build a company. And Dave pulled me aside and said, you know, do you, was this a class project for you, or do you want to devote your life to this? And I was like, well, that's a heavy question, but I want to devote my life to this. And he said, okay, great, because there's something that's not public yet, but I just got hired to run, be a managing director of Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which is Bill Gates' climate venture fund that he stood up in 2017. So if you're serious about this, we want to back you. This big moonshot idea in geothermal is the exact kind of company.
And they have a little bit of capital, I think.
A little bit, yeah. That was the big announcement that, you know, that goes back about 10 years ago now, that Bill announced this, and he said, we're doing it, it's going to be $1 billion, and we're going to back, you know, really long-term, big swing bet companies. And so that worked out pretty well, but even then, you know, that's not, you know, going from a little bit of capital to having enough capital to actually like drill wells and build power plants is quite a journey. So the other thing that was important for us in that stage was there was a program called Activate that was actually started by really a partnership with the Department of Energy, and focused on trying to help early stage entrepreneurs building companies at the frontier of science. And the way that program worked is you got partnered up and embedded inside the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, which is a great place to go if you're trying to learn how to you know, sort of push the frontier of science. So we got accepted into that program. So we kind of, right after we graduated from Stanford, moved across the bay and ended up in Berkeley, California. My co-founder Jack Norbeck and I, in the Activate program, and that's where, again, we got embedded in the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. We built some really great partnerships. Even to this day, we have ongoing research collaborations with LBNL, which is pretty exciting. And then that's also how we kind of got introduced to the entire DOE ecosystem when it comes to the grant funding they do to support technology innovation. So those were some pretty important days, important points early on that, you know, the dollar figures back then were still measured in the few hundreds of thousands of dollars or the low single-digit millions of dollars. So not quite what we needed to drill wells, and not quite where we are today, where we've gotten to a little bit larger dollar figures, but exactly what we needed to get the business started.
So is it fair to say that the other geothermal guys that were out there at the time were more kind of conventional producers, you know, shallow wells, vertical well development, you know, take the easy money, and you come in and bring the secret sauce from the shale revolution? Obviously a step change in economics related to.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. I think there's a lot of parallels with how this actually works, because, you know, it wasn't too different. You know, we're sort of, one of our advisors calls this just shale 3.0, or the third revolution, because he, actually this guy, he was Greg Lavelle, who was the CTO of ConocoPhillips for many years, and now he's retired as CTO there, but he's very passionate about geothermal, so that's the framework he uses on it. And when you talk to him, he says it's fascinating because you go back 25 years ago, and it wasn't, you know, the large oil majors that were innovating in shale. It was the independents and the wildcatters, and everybody said it won't work. You know, here's all the reasons why it won't work, and that's why it was, you know, Mitchell Energy and these smaller companies that were on the frontier of innovation, and not the companies that were, you know, orders of magnitude larger than them. and he was like, I went through all the journeys of like, well, that'll never work. And then they started getting the Barnett and the Haynesville going, and then it was like, well, okay, it worked for gas, but it'll never work for oil. It was the next phase, and then so that was a period that they went through, and now when we started this up, I think that was sort of like, it worked for gas, and then it worked for oil, but it'll never work for geothermal is sort of the next thing we heard. But these combinations of technologies solve, obviously what's a cross-cutting challenge in the subsurface, and so I actually think it does parallel a lot those early days where there were so many skeptics and naysayers, and even decades into the shale revolution, there were all kinds of people who would tell you, oh, it'll never work, look at the decline rates, all these other challenges, and of course, to play it forward to today, the U.S. is the largest oil and gas producer in the world, and that wouldn't have been possible without these technologies. So it was, I think what we went through in the 2017 till now when we started the company was exactly what happened with first shale gas in the 2000s and then shale oil in the 2010s. And so I think it's just part of the innovator's journey. You always have to take a risk and take a bet, and you're going to find people that use very big words and lots of analysis to show that it'll never ever work. But you just produce and execute for some time, and you end up creating believers.
Well, you got to have that the world is flat group out there, because if you didn't have that, then there wouldn't be anything to do because they'd all figured it out.
Well, and we recently interviewed a CEO who said that if you're continuing to hear no, he's an entrepreneur as well, just like you, then you're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Because if you're hearing yes, then it's just like everyone else is doing it. They're going to the left. You need to go to the right.
But we need to make sure there's some proper context there. But yes, absolutely. And
I talked to somebody recently who told me, this is one of these, maybe the world is flat people, who said that there's always so much noise and hype around stuff that he doesn't even pay attention to something unless it has 5 years of operating history. And I asked him, in that framework, how does the world ever get anything new?
Yeah.
And he didn't have any answer for me. And I think there's a lot of folks that just want to sit back and be naysayers. But, and the naysayers are right quite a bit of the time. And on a percentage basis, they don't do bad. If you just sit back and say, that won't work, that won't work, that won't work, you'll actually be right the majority of the time.
Right.
But the times you're wrong are the technologies that change the world. And so it's, you got to have a framework that actually allows for the world to try something new.
Well, also, too, wait 5 years for an industry to develop. If you come in then, you're a lemming.
You missed the boat.
You missed the boat.
Yep.
And we've seen that in so many different.
Yeah. So standing up a company can be stressful, I would imagine, especially going from you and a co-founder to now I believe you've about, and correct me if I'm wrong, like 150 full-time employees plus like another 100 contractors. What is that like? How did you learn your leadership style? And then for me, I always wake up in the middle of the night worrying about something. So if that were to happen to you, what keeps you up at night?
Yeah, a leadership style is, it's like a lot of things. Surround yourself with great mentors, keep a growth mindset. I think one thing we try to embed at Fervo, from me all the way down, is that if we're successful, sort of by definition, the company changes constantly. Because we're always taking on bigger and bigger challenges, and so you always have to recognize that what worked for you to get to this point is probably not what's going to work for you to get forward. So we sort of embed that in our DNA, and a phrase that we repeat around a lot is we're going to grow so fast that if we're not willing to completely reinvent ourselves at least every quarter, then we're not going to keep up. And so I think a lot of the leadership and growth is not getting tied to something just because it helps us get to where we are in the journey today, but recognizing that what we're doing next is totally different. So we need to have a growth mindset and adapt about how we're going to manage the company and be on that leadership journey. And so I think that's a huge part of running a startup successfully. I think you can get trapped in, well, we've been so successful to date and we did it this way, so let's stay doing it that way. And you have to keep that growth mindset and grow and adapt with the company.
And is that through, do you have like an all hands? Do you have these like deep dive strategy sessions? Like, because you can just get stuck in the mundane.
Yeah.
But so how do you keep everybody so excited and innovative?
Well, so, there's a few different things there. I think we actually, Jack and I, going back all the way to 2017 when we started the company, sat down and wrote what we wanted our mission and values of the company to be. And I feel like sometimes in entrepreneurship, that can be a check-the-box exercise, and a lot of people think it's silly, and it is if you don't come back to it. But we were pretty intentional about trying to create that atmosphere. So there's things in our corporate mission and values that we draw from to this day, and one of the things we always talk about is innovation through collaboration, which is a huge thing at Fervo, which is that, like, you know, we're not going to solve our challenges. You know, all the ideas that make Fervo work were not in my head, you know, the day we started the company, and they've been brought to the people who've joined Fervo from our research collaborators and working across different disciplines. And the other one that we write in there is actually one of our 4 values is stop and smell the roses.
Oh,
and it's an intentional thing, and what I always tell people about when I write it, and you could probably guess this now that I've run a very fast-growing startup for a decade. I'm not always a very chill guy. And so we talk about this at the company, and I was like, I didn't write Stop and Smell the Roses because I'm a really casual, chill guy that likes to just relax. I wrote it as a reminder to myself and now the rest of the company that, like, we're on this multi-decade long journey. And if we just grind constantly, then we're going to get burnt out. We're not going to achieve the mission. You know, this isn't a quick flip company. We tell people when you join Fervo, we want you to join for life. And you know, you need to build your work in such a way that you can perform at a really high level for decades. That's kind of the goal whenever we have people join. And so the way we action that is we always talk about celebrating wins. You know, so when something happens, we actually celebrate it as a company. We take time out every summer to do a company-wide all-hands that we've done as a tradition ever since we started it, which is a very different animal when you go from 2 people to 200 people. But that kind of stuff, you know, I think a lot of times startups miss out on how important that kind of community building aspect of the company is, and you can run a huge trap where you're like, oh man, like we're so on the grind. We can't take time for this stuff. That's a distraction. But you realize that if people aren't on the same page, if they're not motivated and excited to come to work, they're not going to perform at the level that you want to perform at. So we just sort of build it into, you know, how we structure the company. And the other thing I always tell people when I go and give lectures on entrepreneurship and other things is I've never once heard you hear a CEO or a founder, if the company fails, give all kinds of reasons. You know, oh, we didn't get along with the co-founder. You know, the board was misaligned. We had, the market shifted from us. The tech didn't perform, and all the lessons learned and interviews and everything I've seen, I've never once seen a CEO say, you know, it was a great business idea, but we just spent too much time, you know, communicating, and it didn't leave time for the rest of the work. And I joked with people that we want to be the first company that ever fails from over communication, because I don't think any company ever does it that way. So it's something that really matters, that we want to create a culture at Fervo that people like who they work with. They want to share ideas. They don't want to have egos about it. You know, they want the best idea to win, not their idea to win. And they enjoy coming to work and are on the journey for the long haul. And I think you have to be very intentional if you want to create that kind of culture.
So what is your budget for monthly roses to be delivered to the office?
They're more metaphorical.
I'm just saying,
roses.
when I come to visit, I'd like to see some actual roses.
Yeah. Well, it's actually, that goes back to our founding. So the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab is a pretty cool place. You're up in the Berkeley Hills above the San Francisco Bay Area. And our building, actually, it was funny because it was so tucked away back in the hills that we didn't get cell phone service. So that was always a challenge. But we were right by the Berkeley Botanical Garden, actually. And this sort of origin of they're a little bit metaphorical roses, but I guess not completely metaphorical, because when it was just Jack and I, and we were literally sharing a cubicle in the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and building a company when you're 2 people and you got to fundraise, and everyone tells you your idea is terrible, and every day is a grind, and you just get rejected constantly. Every so often, we just look up and say, like, oh, I'm spent. We got to do something. And we would actually walk out of our cubicle that we shared and go across the street, and we were in the Lawrence Berkeley Botanical Garden, actually. And I just found, taking a walk with Jack for an hour and just chit-chatting about life and the challenges we're facing and everything, and getting out of that, dropping that day-to-day grind and spending an hour to clear your head and think bigger about the mission and commiserate with a coworker about how hard everything is. Just let us come back refreshed and recharged. So they're metaphorical roses, except there was actually a nice rose garden in the Berkeley lab, and that's sort of like the part of the origin of the value there. Yeah.
I swear, the last several conversations we've had with our different guests, I feel like they're talking to me, and as I think about,
I'll send you some roses, David.
Life and everything else, it's important. Well, while we're here, and want to make sure we cover this, we're all guests of Baker Hughes. We're here in Italy, and we were talking a little bit earlier, before we started this, and then during the show, talking about the challenges. Can you tell us a little bit about why you've partnered with Baker Hughes, or why Baker Hughes partnered with you, and talk about what their contributions have been to making Fervo a real viable, real thing?
Yeah, happy to. I think we're, if you think back through Fervo's origin, and also what I talked about earlier, that point about innovation through collaboration is one of the things we realized is that a lot of these geothermal companies pre-Fervo, like I said, they weren't headquartered in Houston, they weren't talking to the same suppliers, and a lot of times they were really not dealing with the companies that I thought were on the forefront of engineering and operational excellence. And when we started Fervo from day one, that was a mission for us, and when I was drilling for BHP in the Eagle Ford, we drilled on H&P Flex 3 super spec rigs, and the first rig I visited on a geothermal project was a 40-year-old Kelly rig. And I was like, I remember reading about this in a textbook. Yeah. And y'all are still using it to drill wells. So I think a lot of that performance gap, I think the industry, the geothermal industry, I didn't think appreciated how important it was to have long-term partners and be on the forefront of innovation. So that story came full circle. I insisted that we use an H&P Flex 3 rig whenever we drilled our first wells as a company, and that's what we've drilled with every day, and they become an investor and a partner. And so that's been core to how we are from the beginning is if we're bringing oil and gas technology to the geothermal space, let's go straight to the companies that were on the forefront of making that happen when it came to our service providers and our partners. And Baker Hughes has been a really interesting case there because we've been working with Baker Hughes back, from the point we started drilling our first wells about 5 years ago, because they've got a great oilfield services group, and drilling and logging and all sorts of other products that they provide with us has been great. But Baker Hughes is a little bit unique among all these companies that what they have here in Florence, where we are, is one of the best turbo machinery engineering groups in the world. And so not only do they have the oilfield services supply of this, but they also have the industrial technology side of this. Which meant they were one of the very unique companies that could provide both parts of our business. We've got this drilling and subsurface part of the business, but then also the power plant part of the business. And so what we were excited about is last year, we'd worked with Baker Hughes for years on the oilfield services side, but they circled and said, we need to be on the forefront of new technologies, and we are going to invest a lot of our own resources to try to becoming one of the best geothermal turbine providers out there. And so they put together in front of us an offering last year that uses all of the engineering and scientific resources that they have had for decades, to build their traditional turbine business to geothermal for the first time. And so there are not only an oilfield supplier, drilling supplier to us, but actually for Cape Phase 2, we're going to be providing some of the turbines for that project. So it's a really interesting partnership, because they're kind of the only company that cross-cuts our entire business from the drilling aspect all the way through the power plant design and electricity delivery, and we're really excited to be partnering with them and bringing their expertise not just on the downhole stuff, but on the turbine side of the business as well, and they're pretty uniquely situated to be able to do that.
Yes, it's really fascinating to watch, all the engineering, the ideas, the solutions that the oil field have generated over the years that I don't think a lot of people give it credit for, and how that's come in full circle, particularly like in the data center development. We're seeing a lot of traditional oilfield service companies meet the demands of consumers that were anti oilfield service, oil and gas, energy in general, it seems, and to see companies like Baker Hughes, get multiple innings, in the game to continue participating, and it's exciting to see, and it's encouraging to see, because I don't think there's too many industry sectors that can rise to meet the challenges of your particular subsector of the energy space.
Yeah, and I mean that's one of the things we said from Fervo day one is, we're a unique business, and if you think about our investor set, we started at Stanford Climate Ventures. We've got a lot of investors who are really passionate about carbon emission reduction and solving climate, and I think that's fantastic. But one of the things we were insistent on from day one is you look at what the oil field has accomplished, and it's not just drilling wells, it's the ability to solve a technical challenge rapidly and quickly and with partners, the ability to get equipment anywhere in the world very quickly and efficiently, and the ability to manage complex projects, and we're not going to be successful in an energy transition if we just ignore all those capabilities and the great people that drive it. And so I think the beautiful part that I love about Fervo and how we've started it is a new energy business. It's something that's on the frontier. It produces carbon-free electricity, and that's all very exciting, but it's something that we don't have to reinvent the wheel on so many of the technical challenges that we find, because it's so adjacent to the oil and gas industry, and we can go 10 times faster than so many of the other technologies that are trying to solve this energy transition challenge, because we can tap into our partners and the skill sets of the oil field to make that happen.
Sure. One thing I want to touch on real quick, just kind of get a sense for scale.
Yeah.
What is the scale of this industry sector? I mean, when you think about, you came from traditional oil and gas, and we talk about well spacing and everything. What does that look like in the geothermal world?
It looks very similar. So that's something that we've brought to the table as well. So we're doing multi-well pad drilling in geothermal, which is a huge cost saver, because that for the same reason it was a big cost saver in shale. You're not doing a rig move every well, and you're building well pad facilities for 8 wells instead of 1 well.
Sure.
And so that's kind of our systems, what they look like, because we have a well pad with 8 to 10 wells on it, and we actually just put a power plant right next door to it. So we have minimal pipeline cost, and it's a very modular approach. And at our Cape Phase 1 temperature and well spec, what we have is that 8 to 10 well pad will produce about 33 megawatts of electricity. So we've got that pad and a 33 megawatt power plant right by it. So Cape Phase 1 will start producing around 100 megawatts later this year, and that will be 3 of those well pads, 3 well pads, 3 power plants.
Sure.
Now, as we go to Cape Phase 2, we're doing hotter wells, longer laterals, more intense completions. This all rhymes with how the shale revolution took off as well. So now 8 to 10 wells can do 50 megawatts plus. So we're bringing the power plant size larger, which is pretty exciting for us. And Project Cape that we're doing in Utah is going to be a 500 megawatt project. So we're doing that 100 megawatts this year. We'll bring on all 500 by 2028. And to give some sense of scale for people who don't think in megawatts all the time, it's enough power to do about 500,000 homes of electricity.
Sure.
We're in the state of Utah. When that project is done, it's going to be over 10% of the entire state of Utah's electricity generation, and that is really just the beginning for us. So this could be a massively impactful industry.
Can you speak to resiliency, maybe decline rates of these wells? I mean, do you have the same type of decline rate?
Yeah.
Because it seems like you've got somewhat of a closed loop system. You're taking water and
Yeah.
You're basically just throwing water on hot rock, right?
Yeah. So it's a little bit different than shale, and in some ways, it looks a little bit more like when it's on operations, like a SAGD operation or a water flood, where we're not really, we're not net extracting fluid over time. We're actually re-injecting 100% of the fluid we bring up. And so you don't see the massive year one falls off in production that you see in a shale oil and gas well, because we're not drawing down the pressure the way you are in that system. So what we have to worry about from a thermal decline standpoint, from a production standpoint, is thermal decline, actually, because we're actually recirculating that geothermal brine and withdrawing heat faster than the natural recharge rate. And so this is where, probably one of the biggest engineering debates for the last 20 years in shale has been well spacing. Well, get ready, because well spacing is the big engineering debate in geothermal as well, because you have to solve for your economic optimized spacing. And our equation is a little bit different than shale, but it follows some of the same principles. If we put the wells too close together, you can pretty much guarantee they're going to be tightly connected and drive high flow rates. So it's good for initial production,
Sure.
but it's not, you're not accessing enough reservoir volume to do kind of a multi-decade production, so it'll cool off too quickly. Conversely, if you space the wells too far apart, you're going to access a huge reservoir volume per well, so you might have this multi-decade asset, but if not enough of your fractures connect and they're too far apart, then you're not going to get high enough initial flow rates.
Sure.
So we're always trying to solve for that optimum, and the thermal decline is nowhere near as rapid as shale declines. What we see as production rates, as you would sort of expect, because we're re-injecting all the fluid, are pretty stable over time. But we'll drop the temperature of the reservoir by a couple degrees Fahrenheit every year. So what we end up with is, for us, by the time you're about 20 to 30 years into the production life, you may have cooled off the production enough that it's time to just kind of decommission the well because you're not getting enough thermal energy out of it anymore. But it's a very gradual long-term decline, and it's something we can control because well spacing is the engineering parameter that drives what that decline rate looks like.
So is there ever a thought where you could kind of choke it back and kind of let it reheat?
It will reheat, and sort of there's different rules of thumb on this, but you got to let it reheat for at least as long as it was producing. So
Gotcha.
There's actually concepts people have about, if we were to produce a certain bench of production for 30 years and then decommission it, you could come back 50, 100 years from now and restart that production, and it will have heated up over that time.
That's interesting.
But just to be clear, we don't put that in our financial model.
Sure. No.
We're not relying on on that 2150 production, but it is something that does get recharged over time.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And lastly, before we probably wrap it up, because I know you've
got a couple of questions, but we're wrapping it up.
Do you want me to?
Go ahead.
Well, so let's, not necessarily high pressure, but high temperature environment, your well cost probably a little higher. You're using different tubulars and stuff. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So we have actually brought costs down quite a bit since we started. So our first pilot project, Project Red in Nevada, the quick specs on that, about 8,000 foot TVD, about a 3,000 foot lateral. And because we're drilling in granite, which is a much harder rock than shale, and because of the temperatures, we obviously didn't replicate that shale performance from day one. So we drilled that well. We were excited about it. The first horizontal well ever drilled for geothermal production in the world. And but it took us 75 days to drill that well, which if you're drilling wells in the shale patch today, that you would laugh at that. But it's not that different from the early shale wells.
Sure.
And that's because it took us 11 BHAs to drill actually that first 3,000 foot lateral, because the bits couldn't hold up to it, the motors couldn't hold up to the bits couldn't hold up to the rock hardness, the motors couldn't, and MWD tools couldn't hold up to the temperatures. We were constantly having to replace it. But we were just starting there. That was the starting point. We were collecting the data to drive this forward. So you look at a well today, we'll drill about 10,000 foot TVD, 5,000 foot lateral, and we're doing our wells sub 20 days now. So massive improvement on a cost per foot basis, on a days versus depth basis. And now instead of a couple hundred feet per BHA that we run, we get a couple thousand feet because we've developed the right ways to deal with the high temperatures and the hard rock, and we've adapted the bits to work in that condition. And so that allowed us to bring that first well cost from like 13 million down to about 4 million. Wow. And so we're still more expensive on the drilling side than what you see with shale wells, but we've closed the gap pretty significantly. And the world has now drilled hundreds of thousands of horizontal wells in sedimentary formations. There's only been a few dozen wells drilled horizontally in granite formations, and so we're still very, very early on that learning curve.
That's fascinating.
Okay.
Well, this has been an awesome conversation.
Absolutely. And I have a quick final closing question, because I always love to get to know the CEOs personally. Mm-hmm. So you have a beautiful bride.
Yes.
And a newborn son.
That's right.
How has that changed you as an individual, and how has that changed you as a CEO?
A lot, actually. I think one of the things that really struck me, so my son was born last year, so he's 9 months old now, and born in 2025, which you start doing the math on that, I was like, that means he might go to college in 20 years from now and enter the workforce and everything. But he will probably live to well into the 2100s, and that's something that I think has made a big impact on how I kind of approach the world and think about things. To know that this, little lump that I see at home is actually going to be living in the world for well into the 2100s, which I probably, unless there's major advancements in and health, I probably won't be there. But it is amazing what that does, I think, for thinking about efforts long term and really thinking through, what does it mean to make the world a better place and leave it better for the next generation. And the fact that I now personally know somebody who's going to be very, very, very well, because he's my son is, and he's going to be living through that time period, I think has shifted a lot about how I think about problems at the company level, at the societal level, and it's just it's amazing what having a child and having an attachment to the next generation that will inherit whatever we screw up or whatever we get right does kind of for your thinking, and that's something that has definitely shifted how I approach problems.
Well, he can run Fervo one day.
He may.
That's the legacy you're going to leave him.
Yeah.
So we'd like to close up our conversations asking our guests if there's any advice they'd like to share with our listening audience, any advice they would have loved to have had when they were younger that gathered along the way from experience or a mentor. Any parting words?
Yeah, I think a few things I reflect about with entrepreneurship is most of the battle's just kind of putting yourself out there, and you got to be willing to do it and face the rejection. And what I see a lot of entrepreneurs make a mistake of is they try to build in secrecy, and they're so paranoid of somebody stealing their idea that they never actually talk about it, or they're worried like, well, I haven't perfected the pitch yet, so I'm going to wait till it's perfect. And I can't tell you how many companies fail before they even start, because you have somebody behind who's like, well, one day when all the stars line up and I've perfected the pitch, I'm going to launch and go. And that's just not how the world works. And every time you pitch somebody, or every time you tell them what you're doing or put your story out there, number one, you're giving them your audience or whoever you're talking to a starting point to think about. And number two, you may get a good idea from them or an introduction for them or something. Because what ends up happening is you come back to that person in 3 months, and I think people are always afraid to put their story out there because they're like, well, it's not fully polished yet, so I'm going to get, they're just not going to like it. But then if you tell them it one day and you come back 3 months later and it's a lot better, they don't think, wow, that first pitch was terrible, so I'm never talking to them again. They think, wow, that first pitch was terrible, and look at how much they've improved over 3 months. And if you don't have that starting point, it's not a good way to do it. And if you're too afraid to put your story out there and engage with people and get feedback, because you can't get better unless you're also saying, like, why didn't you invest? What could I have done better? Where were the holes in my story? You're not going to get there. So I think my biggest piece of advice, particularly on entrepreneurship, is you got to put yourself out there. View every rejection as a opportunity to collect feedback and get better. And you're never going to get help from somebody if you don't tell them what you're doing. And the earlier you can start that clock, and the more widely you can spread your ideas, and the more intentional you can be about soliciting feedback and improving the story, the better you're going to be. So just start and put yourself out there. That's the biggest piece of advice I have for entrepreneurship.
Love it.
That's great advice.
You want to close this out, sir?
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll just say ciao. Thanks for joining us. This has been great, Tim.
Grazie.
Thank you for having me.
We look forward to spending a little bit more time with you while we're here together in Italy, and appreciate you joining us on the Oilfield 360.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Look forward to having you back on at some point in the future and hear how your current project's turning out.
Fantastic.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
You can find us on YouTube and Spotify and all your favorite platforms to listen to podcasts. Thank you for joining us here in Florence, Italy.